What's up, guys, and welcome to the first commentary on the channel. My name's Jenks, and in this video we're going to talk about gearing the Greeks. We're going to go over the gear that works best for me and the gear that I like, and we're also going to go over alternates that might fit other playstyles or work out better for you. If this video helped you out, or it helped a friend, or you found it entertaining, do me a favor and leave a like. If we can get 20 of them, we're going to do another gearing video. Either we'll move on to Egypt, or we'll do gearing Greeks on a budget, where we'll talk about gearing the Greeks affordably enough to get the job done. If you want to see more content like this, subscribe to the channel and help me out and figure out if we should do Egypt next or do gearing Greeks on a budget, and leave a comment below. Alright, starting out with the farms, I like to keep my farms as cheap as possible. So for the walls on my farms, I'll use Walls of the Architect. This wall is a Celeste exclusive and offers the highest cost reduction and build time reduction in the game for this slot. As far as the construction edition slot, I go with wall joints of Kaveh. The reason I go with these wall joints is because they offer the biggest cost reduction in the game. Now, yeah, they have the build time penalty, but with me using the Epic Advisor that reduces build time along with Divine Construction Hammer, it's not really a big deal, even considering the farms really don't take long to build anyway, so I don't mind that penalty. Some alternates other players might choose, maybe the iron wall joints or even the divine wall joints, which reduce cost quite a bit, do not carry the build time penalty, but just not quite as high as wall joints of Kaveh. So I'll go with the wall joints of Kaveh personally on my farms. Now for the town center, I want it to build quickly, I want it to be cheap, and I want it to train and research fast. So I choose gear around that. The first being the Perseus Horse Bow. It's available up to level 39. Level 39 is going to be expensive. It's going to offer you the best cost reduction in the game for the TC. It's not huge, but it's the best cost reduction bow that's in the game. As far as the arrows, I choose the arrows of Theseus only because they're legendary. There's nothing really good to go in this slot as far as cost reduction or train time. The arrows of Theseus have a good amount of damage, good amount of crit, and there's just really nothing better to go here. As far as the walls of the Architect all the way. They reduce the cost and the build time, just like I want with my TCs. And of course the Athenian training manual, which allows the train and research rate to be quicker. For the villager, I prefer to use the Divine Hammer of Construction. When I'm not using the Divine Hammer of Construction, I can really feel it. Things don't go up as quickly as they normally do. I need to send more villagers to build and get things done. So the Divine Hammer of Construction is going to be my choice over the Hammer of Kaveh. Other folks might prefer using the Hammer of Kaveh because it does gather better. It has a 3% more bonus on gathering than Divine Hammer of Construction, but the Divine Hammer of Construction has like a 20% bonus over the Hammer of Kaveh for building speed. So I would prefer personally the Divine Hammer of Construction. For the cloth armor, I use a lot of wood with Greeks with the gastras and the ballistas and everything that I'm building. So the wood bonus for Ancient Trojan Guard Chitin is going to be the most useful for me. Now for the third slot, this is where we might find a lot of differing opinions. I prefer the Meat of Eternal Life because I want the highest train time possible to get my villagers out and get them working right away. Some folks might argue, yeah, but once the villager's out of your town center, you're just wasting that slot because they're no longer using anything, whereas maybe a speed hood like the Delian hood or a legendary hood that increases speed might continue to offer throughout the whole game a bonus. But me personally, I just want them to train and get out and do their job. For spearmen, it's going to come down to playstyle as far as what you're going to use in this first slot. I find myself mainly using spearmen for anti-cavalry units early on in the game, but I still need them to do things occasionally like skirmish rush, stuff like that. So for me, I choose the Heavy Spear of Sacrifice because it still has a lot of damage, but offers that anti-cavalry bonus damage and the cavalry armor for when I counter the cavalry in the game with them. Now, there is a Roz Golden Spear. I think it's max level 39. it has like an 80 something percent bonus damage for cavalry. So it would slice and dice through cavalry. That'd be a great spear to have. If you're finding yourself only using your spearmen to do spearman rushes and don't really use them in game much, and you just want DPS, the Heavy Spear of Gilgamesh would offer a really nice amount of DPS by doing a ton of damage and some crit. As far as the medium armor, I use the Cuirass of Rostam. It's going to offer a bunch of health and give you protection against cavalry armor. You could always go with the Apocalypse Breastplate if you're going DPS, or the Divine Breastplate, which is the new Celeste Divine version of the Apocalypse Breastplate. But I would recommend the Cuirass of Rostam. And for the final slot, I would use the Master Assassin Gauntlets or the Ramses to offer the extra damage and health. So for the hoplites, a lot of people set them up to be real tanky and absorb damage. I myself try to mix and match with health and DPS because I still want them to do a good amount of damage. So if you want to set them up tanky, you could just go for all health, just as high of health as you can. But me personally, I like a mixture. So I choose the Light Spear of Rostam, which offers a good amount of damage and crit. Likewise with the Shield of Rostam, which is the same, a good amount of damage, crit. It still offers a little bit of health. And the Divine Breastplate is what I would use, which is the newly updated version of the Apocalypse Breastplate, which offers a really good amount of health and damage. And likewise for the Master Assassin's Gauntlets, or Ramses Heavy Gauntlets of the Sun, for the Soldier's Gear slot. Now for the Hypaspis, I don't find myself using them a whole lot, but when I do use them, it's specifically to counter infantry early on until I can make hoplites. So I have my Hypaspis set up to counter infantry. I have the Sword of Menes, which has infantry armor along with a bunch of health to help combat the infantry waves that I get on certain quests before I get to age 3, or Relentless Canyons when the infantry waves come very early on, or even in Persian Coercion. So that works out great for that slot for me. I also use the Shield of Rostam, which gives a great amount of damage, a little bit of crit, and good health. So that fits that slot perfect for me. The Breastplate of Gilgamesh is great because it gives a ton of melee infantry armor and also a ton of health. So really helps them get the job done against the infantry. And I use Master Assassin's Gauntlets or Ramses. It may not be the best choice. I really focus on getting as much gold and food early on as I can through hunts and berries. So perhaps Heracles' training sword might be a better fit in this slot, as it helps them pump out quicker, or maybe even the embossed boots, which makes them move quicker, might be a better choice in that slot. But I like to go with the Master Assassin's Gauntlets or the Ramses. For my Toxotes, I have those set up as a combination of range and anti-infantry. As far as the bow I use is the Bow of the Master Hunter. Bow of the Master Hunter is the longest distance bow in the game. It's Celeste exclusive. It nudged past Delos for the longest distance. I also use the longbow of Actaeon, which gives it a bit more damage. It's still a little bit of range, but I choose the Bow of the Master Hunter. For the arrows, to give me my mix, I choose the Arrows of Amenhotep, which offer a good amount of damage and the massive amount of infantry bonus damage to give them kind of a mix. If you wanted to go with just pure distance, as long as you are either Delos or playing Celeste during a time when the Alliance Wars is not active, you can choose the Delos arrows, which is the game's longest distance arrows. If you want to go all DPS, you could choose Athena arrows or the arrows of Theseus. But I would choose the Arrows of Amenhotep personally for the Toxotes. And for the Divine High Visor's robes is kind of the only choice for the shirt for a Toxote. And as far as the soldier's gear, the Master Assassin's Gauntlet for the damage and the health, or the Ramses is going to be the way to go on these guys. For the Hippocon, I focus on damage. So I use a Vorpal Blade, which is the highest damage sword in the game. You could also use a Gladius of Bellerophon from the Cyprus Legendary store to give a really nice amount of damage and some crit. But the Vorpal is the highest damage sword in the game. That's what I choose to use. I choose the Shield of Rostam because it has a high amount of damage and some crit, along with a little bit of health. So I choose the Shield of Rostam for my Hippocon. Now, sticking with the damage theme, I go with the Athena's Golden Gorget, which is max level 39. It's very expensive, but I choose that because I like the damage that it gives my Hippocon. Or you could just go with the horse armor of Sargon if you want the Pierce armor, but I like the Athena's Golden Gorget. And of course the Master Assassin's Gauntlets in the last slot, or the Ramses. For the Peltasts, I don't use these units very often, so I'm not going to offer any alternatives. If you have them, you can post them below. For the Peltasts, I choose the Curse of the Archer because it has a really good amount of range on this javelin. I choose the range. As far as the shield goes, Ajax Heavy War Shield, level 37, should be a lot easier, as most non-level 40 quests, when you get to level 40, drop 37 chests. So you should be able to find that relatively easy. But if I am countering ranged with them, it's nice to have that Pierce armor that the Ajax Heavy War Shield offers. For the cloth armor, I would use the Divine High Visor's robes, the High Visor's robes, or the Memphis Militia tunic, as them being a kind of a ranged unit, having the damage is really nice. And of course, for the final slot, the Master Assassin's Gauntlets, or the Ramses Heavy Gauntlets of the Sun. For the Prodromos, I find myself using them not only to counter cavalry, but to counter siege, things like that sometimes. So I kind of have mine set up for damage and a little bit of anti-cavalry. So I choose the Heavy Spear of Gilgamesh for my Prodromos. I like it because it offers the damage and the crit. I suppose you could use the anti-cavalry spear if you're using the Prodromos to counter cavalry more often, but I choose the Heavy Spear of Gilgamesh. As far as the light armor, I choose the Gorget of Bellerophon, which does have the extra cavalry armor for countering the cavalry, because I just find it to be appropriate. So I would choose the Gorget of Bellerophon. You could also use the light armor of Sargon if you want the anti-pierce armor, but I go with the Gorget of Bellerophon. And of course, for the last slot, Master Assassin's Gauntlets or Heavy Gauntlets of the Sun. For the Ballista, I like to focus solely on damage. I just want to use every piece that has the highest damage possible, and going with that, the throwing arm I choose is the Siege Arm of the Elephant. It has the highest damage of any siege arm in the game. I suppose you could use a Blessed Arm if you want a little bit of range, but I would prefer the Siege Arm of the Elephant, as damage seems to work out best. You could just keep upgrading it until you get the highest damage possible, as it is just a level 40 rare item, so it shouldn't be too hard for you to get. It still has a little bit of maximum range on it, which is really nice. Sticking with the damage theme, I go with the Heavy Destroyer Weave. It's a lot of damage. It replaces the Herculean gold plates as the game's highest damage armor plating. It's a Celeste exclusive item, but that's what I would pick for the Ballista armor plating. For the final slot, the engineering accessory, I go with Delian wheels. Now, I am Delos. I picked Delos as an alliance. Currently, at the making of this video, you can use all the alliance's gear because the Alliance Wars is not active. But let's say in the future, Alliance Wars is active, and you're not Delos, you can always choose the Heavy Cedar Beams or the Divine Heavy Cedar Beams, which is a Celeste exclusive alternate to Heavy Cedar Beams, the legendary version, so to speak. The setup I have now on my Rams works out perfect for me. It's a good blend of damage and movement speed. I use the Ram Head of Khnum. It's really good at damaging buildings, especially coupled with the Heavy Destroyer Weave, which really makes it hit really hard. I use the Wheels of Archimedes to make it quick, because using the Delos wheels, it was just too slow. It took forever. So I think this is a really good blend of movement speed and damage to where it really tears the heck out of buildings and is able to get in there and move quick enough. It does it before it gets destroyed. Alright, so we can knock out a lot of buildings all at once because the gear that I use personally on all these buildings are going to generally be the same. If anyone has any ideas of different gear they think is better, please note in the comments what you think. I couldn't personally come up with any better gear for these buildings. The gear that I'm going to recommend is going to be the Walls of the Architect. The Walls of the Architect both reduces training cost and build time, doesn't focus on one or the other, and also carries a decent amount of health. Now these walls are Celeste exclusive, so you won't find these in the base game. They're only available here on Celeste. Along with the training manual as well, it's Celeste exclusive, and it carries the best train research rate in the game. So these two pieces of gear are what I'm going to recommend for the following buildings. Those buildings are the barracks, the academy, the archery range, the dock, the market, the siege workshop, the storehouse, the temple, the armory, and the stables. For houses, I use Walls of the Architect, reduce the build time and the cost of the houses. Now on the construction edition for houses, I prefer Divine Iron Wall Joints, which are Celeste exclusive, legendary version of Iron Wall Joints, or the Iron Wall Joints, because I don't want to increase the build time of houses, so I don't use the wall joints of Kaveh like I use for the farms. So I stick with the highest reduction in cost without the build penalty for houses, because I really just want to get them up quickly and move on. Because typically I find myself using just one villager to build houses. So that's what works out best for me. I suppose you could use wall joints of Kaveh if you want the cheaper homes, or if you want to use the building construction blueprints to make them build quicker, you can. But I like the cost reduction that Iron Wall Joints or Divine Iron Wall Joints gives me. For the watch posts, I use Walls of the Master Defender. Walls of the Master Defender are a Celeste exclusive item that replaced hand-carved wall braces as the highest LOS walls in the game. It's also really nice to have them here because you can swap them back and forth for your forts. Your forts can have some pretty huge LOS with these on them, so it's nice to have these here if you don't want to keep Walls of the Master Defender on your forts at all times. Also, the Lookouts of Olympus is going to give you the highest line of sight. Being a watch post, you want your line of sight to be as high as possible, so the Lookouts of Olympus are going to help do that. Now for the towers, you're going to have several different ways you could set them up. You can set them up for a lot of crit. You can set them up for a lot of damage. You can set them up for a lot of anti-infantry damage, but I choose to set mine up for range. So to get the most amount of range, I go with the Bow of the Master Hunter. It's going to be a Celeste exclusive item. It's going to give you the most range out of any bow in the game. It's more or less a legendary version of the craftable Arduino's bow. It does surpass the Delos bow for longest distance for a bow in the game. As far as the arrows, I choose the arrows of Actaeon. Now, if you are going for the longest distance, you're probably going to want to choose the Delos bow arrows because those have more distance than the arrows of Actaeon. However, the arrows of Actaeon have a little bit more damage, so I feel pretty comfortable using the arrows of Actaeon. They are legendary, where the Delos arrows are epic, but as far as the distance setup, that's basically your meat and potatoes. The wall are going to be the Wall of Titans. Carries a really good amount of damage, but still retains health. For me personally, I get into issues where health on my towers kind of help out, so I like to have the health of the Wall of the Titans. If you are Carthage, you could use the Carthage walls, which do have a higher DPS than the Wall of Titans. So just FYI if you're Carthage. And for the distance setup, I like to use the Lookouts of Olympus. They provide extra line of sight, so with the distance, I can actually see to do the damage. Now for my caravan, I like to concentrate on two things, and that's trade bonus and movement speed. So with the trade bonus, the higher trade bonus that you have, the shorter the distance needs to be in order for you to achieve the amount of coins at max. So if have a high trade bonus and someone else has no trade bonus, my marketplace is going to need to be much closer to the TC for me to achieve the 150 maximum amount of gold I can do per run. Whereas somebody with a lower trade bonus on their stats would need to build their marketplace farther away from their TC in order to get the same amount of gold. Obviously, a shorter run is going to be a quicker time. It's going to yield more gold. So that's why the trade bonus is important. And obviously the speed, because the faster you get there, the faster you get the 150 gold. And you just, keep running back and forth and generating more gold per second than with less trade and less speed. So the Nectar-Filled water barrel has a great balance of speed and trade. I've seen people using merchant gear that's legendary. It's okay, but in my opinion, the Nectar-Filled water barrel is the best choice for me. So I'm not a mathematician, and I haven't ran formulas on which one is best, but the Nectar-Filled water barrel just seems to make the most sense when you're looking at the stats. So I choose the Nectar-Filled water barrel. Now for the shirt, the double-stitched chitin does have the highest amount of movement speed. Comes with a little bit of pierce armor. I'm really not interested in that. But the movement speed being the highest in the game just makes the caravan run faster. If they get attacked, they're going to die anyway. So, I mean, the movement speed is what I'm most interested in for the caravans. So the last slot, now keep in mind I'm Delos, so I'm going to choose the Delian Adept's hood. It is the highest amount of movement speed on a hood for a laborer gear slot in the game. Now if you aren't Delos, what you'll want to use is maybe the hood of Weyland or any speed hood that you can find with the maximum amount of stats. One thing real quick, back to the double stitch chitin, this is really expensive. You're going to spend a ton of gold in level 10's most chests to get these. For some reason, they don't drop as often as you would think a rare would. So if you see one in the global marketplace or you see one in trade and you think the price seems really high, there's a really good reason for it. These things take a long time to get. So if you think that the price is just too much, try spending money in O's to get it. I've spent hundreds of thousands of coins hunting for them. So hopefully you get a little bit more luckier than I did and get them right away. For the fishing ship, I like to concentrate on food gathering and movement speed, and I want them cheap. So for the first slot, the nets of the Argo. For the arrows, Hades Flaming Arrows, level 30, max level. Highest amount of movement speed on an arrow in the game. It's going to make your fishing ships get to the fishing spots and the docks quicker. As far as the level 28 Artificer's Bronze Plating, it has been replaced by Divine Bronze Plating, which is available at Legendary level 40. So that's going to be the gear choice for the level. So it's going to have the highest amount of movement speed for armor plating. So that's what I would recommend there. Now you could use movement speed oars in the last slot. However, I like to use Hall of the Dolphin. I am not going to use my fishing ship to fight anything. So I don't care that it lowers the health and the damage. If they get attacked, they're going to die anyway. So the 13-ish% loss in health and damage does not mean anything to me, but the 18% reduction in cost does mean something. So I choose to go with the Hall of the Dolphin. If you want really, really fast ships, you could go with the Speed Oar, but for me, it's definitely going to be the Hall of the Dolphin. For the merchant transport, I focus on speed. That's the only thing I really care about with the merchant transport, other than anti-snare, because, I mean, you figure with you're going to do maybe quests for Delphi Limestone. You're going to do maybe occasionally you'll do a quest where you need to get mosaic tile. You're going to need fast ships to get that done. Not only that, when you're carrying troops across the water, you're not going to fight with your transport ships. You're going to want to get away. You're going to want to outrun the ships and get wherever you're going and dump off your people. So the best defense, in my opinion, or for me, is going to be fast transport ships. So in doing so, I like to use the hyena wrapped gaff stick. Now the reason I choose this, there is a lower level 18 gear that does have a little bit more speed, but the 118.9% ish anti-snare resist, you get hit with one little arrow or you get whacked with a sword, it really comes in handy to have that snare resist. So for me, I choose the hyena wrapped gaff stick over the little bit more speed that the other merchant gear gives. So it still gives a really high, I mean, highest amount of speed in the game. So for me, the hyena wrapped gaff stick is definitely the best one to use. It is a craftable item. Now for the arrows, they're going to be Hades flaming arrows. The Hades flaming arrows has the highest movement speed in the game. It's going to be the best choice for transport, as you're really not going to fight with a transport. You're going to want it to get there quickly. So now the armor plating is going to be the divine armor plating or the artificer's bronze plating. Now that's going to be the highest amount of movement speed on a armor plating in the game. The divine bronze plating is going to be the Celeste exclusive item that you would get through legendary drops. Now for the final slot, I do use the Oars of Hatshepsut, and I use those because it's the highest amount of movement speed on the ship accessory slot. I just want them to be fast. So for me, very fast transport ships work perfectly, and hopefully that works really good for you too. Now for the priest, it's just going to come down to play style and the quests that you use as far as the gear that you're going to want to have equipped. I don't use the priest so often, but when I do, I try to keep a hand of different type of gears in my inventory to just kind of switch and mix and match depending on the quest. There are several different staffs that will do different things that will come in handy at different times. You have siege converting staffs, you have infantry converting staff, cavalry converting staff, healing staff, range staff. As far as everyday staff that I leave on my priest as a legendary staff, the Staff of the Oracle, it has a really good amount of range. It's not going to be the most range in the game. The Druranch's True Oak Staff is going to be the most distance. It's a level 37 craftable epic item. So if you're looking for the most range, that would be the best staff to go with range. For the list of other staffs, take a look in the comment section. I'll try to list all the links for all the different staffs that you can have on hand for converting different items. But for example, in a legendary Marion, you may want to have the siege converting staff to convert the ballistas, so you can have those OP ballistas after converting. And different quests that you do might come in handy for the different staffs, but the everyday all-day staff I use is the Staff of the Oracle. It's still not going to be a bad idea to use a distance staff over a siege training staff or any other staff, because you can outrange them a lot easier with the range staff, as long as you have them within your LOS, as long as your army's up there close enough, or you have a watchtower or something along to where your priest can have LOS on them. But as far as the everyday all-day staff, I just go ahead and go with the Staff of the Oracle. It's legendary. It looks really cool. As far as the shirt goes, I use the Robe of Menes. I use that. It has a good amount of health and really good amount of movement speed, so they're a little bit quicker, keeping up with the troops or getting to their destination. You can use maximum health shirts if you want to go that direction. But as far as the shirt that I like with a good blend of health and movement speed, I use the Robe of Menes. Now for the priest accessory, the religious item, I choose the Tablet of the Dead to reduce the training time, to get them out quicker and get the job done. You can go with mats, less sandals if you're trying to get them really quick. You can go with the 6 demon bag if you want to have them a little more health, 35 or 36% more health, so they can stay alive longer, take more hits until they heal themselves. But as far as the everyday all-day setup, it's nice to have that on hand. I would recommend keeping a little stash of different staffs for the priest. For when you need them, you can just swap them out. Now for the triremes, I kind of go back and forth between range and DPS. Right now I have them set up for range, but occasionally I will use the bow of Amenhotep with a good amount of damage and crit, or just a high DPS bow in general. As far as the arrows, I will tend to sometimes use the arrows of Theseus, which give a good amount of damage and crit. But for right now, I have it set up with a distance range setup with the bow of the Master Hunter, which again is the longest distance bow in the game. The arrows of Actaeon, which are not the longest distance arrows, but the longest distance arrows that are legendary. Use the Runic heavy bronze armoring, which has a nice amount of maximum range, gives them a little bit of movement speed and health. It's a great armor plating. It is a craftable armor plating, so you can keep crafting away until you get the best stats, or look to buy those in trade. And as far as the ship accessory on the triremes, I use the Hall of Leviathan. For my ballista trireme, I like to use a maximum distance with the ballista trireme, because when I'm using them, generally I just don't want to be in the vicinity of ships or any danger. I want to attack maybe a town center on an island, or attack something like a dock from far away without fear of the troops. So I go with the Blessed Dionysus throwing arm. It's nice to have the Blessed Dionysus throwing arm on this unit, because then you can swap it out with another one. For example, if I want to use the Blessed Dionysus throwing arm on my Palantonins for the max amount of distance, all I have to do is swap my throwing arm with my Palantonins and my ballista triremes. But generally, when I'm using my ballista trireme, I want the Blessed Dionysus throwing arm. You can, destroy some buildings from quite a distance away, as long as you're packing this throwing arm. So this is what I would recommend for the ballista trireme, hands down. I mean, you can get more damage throwing arms, but I just find the distance just to be so much nicer than anything else I've used on it. Now for the siding, it's going to be the craftable level 40 runic heavy bronze armoring. You can craft these away to get the highest level, the highest stats that you can for the level. I'm going to recommend it because it increases that maximum range even further. The movement speed isn't so handy on this one. The health is nice, but the maximum range is what you're looking for. Now, to increase the damage, using the Hall of Leviathan is nice, because it does add quite a bit of damage to the unit. So I would recommend using the Hall of Leviathan. The speed isn't going to come in as handy. I'm really not looking to be in the mix of battle with this ship, so the health isn't a big factor, but I just want damage and, above everything, the distance. So now the fort is going to be another one of those units where it's just going to come down to personal preference and play style, what you find yourself using it the most for, as far as how you want to set them up. Now I have my tower set up for range, so I want to set my fort up for damage. So it works best for me to use the Hero's Bow of Apollo, which is the highest damage bow available in the game. It's an epic level 40 item available through drops, but you can get yourself a really nice boosted one and just do a ton of raw damage. Now if you want to set your fort up for anti-infantry damage, you could use that recurve bow of Theseus to give the nice bonus in infantry damage. If you want your fort to do a good amount of damage and have higher health, to be harder to take down, you could always use the Hero's Slaying Bow. If you want your fort to have the distance, you can use the Arduina's craftable Alert 37 bow for the distance, or you can go with that bow of the Master Hunter for distance. Me personally, I like to go with the damage because I already have my towers for the range. Sticking with the damage, I like the Arrows of Theseus. You can get a really nice boosted Arrows of Theseus, and with the high damage it does, coupled with the crit, it's a really hard-hitting arrow, arguably the hardest hitting arrow in the game. Now, I'm not a mathematician and I don't have the formula to figure out crit exactly, but even if crit just equaled over the course of however many shots, just one damage, adding the crit and the damage together would be a lot higher than anything else in the game. So I choose to go with the arrows of Theseus. Now, obviously, if you wanted to go with distance, you'd use the arrows of Actaeon, or if you're Delos, you can use the Delos arrows. But if you want to go with damage, raw damage, you can use Athena's Graceful Arrows, which is a level 40 craftable arrow. If you want to go with the anti-infantry, you could use the arrows of Amenhotep, which carry that big anti-infantry bonus amount of damage. But I choose to go with the damage setup, so I choose the arrows of Theseus. Now for the wall, obviously it's going to be the walls of Titans, the wall of the Titans, because that's going to give me that nice amount of damage and still keep the fort really hard to take down with the big amount of health. Again, if you're Carthage, you can use the Carthage walls to get the higher DPS. I like to go with the construction blueprints of Khufu, so that it just goes up quicker, it's done, I can build the next one or move on to the next task. So for me, that's the setup I'm going to go with. Now the Palantonin, definitely probably going to be different than some other folks' recommendations for the best throwing arm. The reason behind me not using, by default, the Blessed Dionysus throwing arm is because I have it right here on my Ballista Trireme that I can switch to my Palantonin anytime I'm doing a quest when I think that distance is really of the essence. Now, I like to use the Blessed throwing arm. It still has a good amount of buff on range, but it has more than twice the damage that the Blessed Dionysus throwing arm is. So I use the Blessed throwing arm by default on my Palantonin. If I do find myself needing huge amount of range, I use the Advisor Timo to get the more range on the Palantonins, and if I really need the maximum amount of range I can possibly get, then I'll switch my Dionysus throwing arm to my Palantonin. But for me, this is the best throwing arm for the Palantonin for me. Now, sticking with range and damage, the heavy runic bronze does not offer any damage, but it does add to that range, and regardless of the throwing arm, it's just going to make it throw that much farther. So coupled with the armor plating and the blessed throwing arm, that range comes in handy. Now, as far as the third slot, I'm Delos, so I'm going to use the Delian wheels, which is going to offer the huge amount of damage. If you want them to have the maximum amount of damage without using Delos gear, you can use the heavy cedar beams or the divine cedar beams. Now for the scout, I set up 100% LOS. To achieve that, you're going to want the divine thrusting Xiphos, which is a Celeste exclusive level 40 legendary. It's going to have the highest LOS in the game. For the light armor, it's going to be the divine rune Gorget, which is a Celeste exclusive level 40 legendary item. Now the last and final slot, Lens of Menes. It's like the item to have, so obviously it's the item to put in your last slot because it's the huge LOS looking glass. So that's what I would recommend. So they are very, very, very expensive, so just be prepared to use a looking glass until you can find one. Now with the Wonder, obviously we're going to use the Walls of the Architect to reduce the build time and the training because it's the best we have. As far as the construction edition slot, I go with the construction blueprints of Khufu. You could also use the iron wall joints or the divine wall joints to reduce the cost of the Wonder, but it just comes down to preference. But me personally, I prefer the construction blueprints of Khufu. For the Sarisa Forward, I have them set up to deal with the ranged units that they're designed to counter. I don't use this unit often, much like the Peltas. But I set them up in a similar way as I did those. With the Curse of the Archer to give the extra distance to try and outrange the ranged units. With the Ajax Heavy War Shield to deal with the pierce damage with the Pierce Armor edition. Same with the Horse Armor of Sargon with the big Pierce Armor. And the Master Assassin Gauntlets or the Ramses Heavy Gauntlets of the Sun. Now for the Gastrophetes, I like the range setup. Hands down, it's what works the best for me, and I'll prefer it over anything. Some people like a more of a DPS damage setup on a Gastra, but I love the range, and to get that I use the Belly Bow of the Master Hunter, which is going to give you the most range of any belly bow in the game. Now, the Belly Bow of the Master Hunter is a level 40 Celeste exclusive item, and it kind of replaced the Zeus Belly Bow. And when I say kind of, it's because the stats aren't exactly the same. The Zeus belly bow has a little bit of crit. With the belly bow of the Master Hunter, that crit is gone, and it's replaced with a little bit of movement speed. So if you're wanting the maximum range belly bow in the game, the belly bow of the Master Hunter is for you. And that movement speed really comes in handy, because with the Gastra being so slow, it helps them move along and get the quest done a little quicker. So hopefully you find that useful as I do. Now, moving on to the arrows, if you're going to want to go max range, you're going to want to use, in your Delos, you're going to want to use the Delos arrows. As far as arrows of Actaeon, you could use those, or even arrows of darkness if you want infantry bonus damage. But I would use the arrows of Actaeon just to give the Gastras the respect they deserve by just making them all orange. Now, for the cloth armor, obviously it's going to be the Divine High Visor's robe, which is the highest damage robe available in the game. I would not recommend any other robe than that. There's not even an alternative to think of. That's definitely hands down the only cloth armor to put on your Gastras. And of course, in the soldier's gear slot, you're going to want the Master Assassin's Gauntlets to increase the damage of the Gastra and also the health. For the fire ship, I would recommend hands down using the oil flask of Hatshepsut. It's going to give you a bunch of damage and also a bunch of ship bonus damage to help clear those ships out of the water. And the heavy siding is going to be the Baronathus heavy siding that I use. It's going to be what I would recommend hands down. It's going to give you a bunch of health, and it's also going to add to that damage. For the ship accessory, I would use the Hull of Leviathan. I find it to be the hull to use on the fire ship. It increases damage quite a bit and health. The cost addition is totally worth it. So that is the setup, hands down, I would recommend for the fire ships.